Hey everyone, we're live.
Hey, welcome everyone. We'll let everyone chime in. For those of you that are watching this post live, welcome to March 31st, nuclear power, data centers, and the crisis of AI control. We'll give everyone a few minutes to kind of wander in. So in the meantime, talk amongst yourselves, grab a coffee or a tea or water or whatever, and we'll let some people come in for about 2 minutes or so, maybe 3. Talk amongst yourselves.
Hope you guys had a good week. And
Yeah, it's interesting. We saw the turbo quant stuff. We saw, AI model stuff. But really, I mean, infrastructure is becoming the big story as it consolidates and becomes a gating factor. That's what I'm seeing. We've seen it like for the last 3 weeks now, but it's becoming really.
so we're going to talk about turbo quant and we're going to talk about ASICs today. And I really think this is a bubble to that extent, man. And a friend of mine, he's a software engineer. He's seen RAM go up and down like this before in the past. One time there was a big fire that knocked out one of the manufacturing facilities. One time, whatever, and he's like, "It will go down. Like, don't spend all your money now." And I really think something just like turbo quant tanked RAM prices. Okay, 3%. It wasn't significant, but once ASICs hit the market, it's going to be quite impressive, I believe. Like, we're going to see this go down substantially.
Yeah, I also think the hardware jumps in the next 3 to 4 months are going to be significant. We'll see Apple's announcement of the new Studio Box, probably be a 1 terabyte minimum. So basically, that's going to allow you to run some big models, even if you get 2 of them and you can run a full size model. And I think at that point, we're going to start seeing more and more a dive into local AI. I really do, because you'll finally have some decent hardware you can use it on. I know you've been experimenting with, and it's okay for now. And with the turbo quant, we can now do smaller models on our hardware. But I really think the hardware updates in the next 3 to 4 months are going to cause a shift.
So I agree with you completely. I think what is going to drive that more often than not is the fact that currently with the pricing models that these companies have constructed, they're subsidizing huge amounts of usage. Claude or Anthropic showed that one user used $27,000 worth of credits off a $200 plan, right? That's not sustainable long term. And they have to find a way to actually make money off of these things. So they're going to start upping their prices or cutting their usage, which all my services have been cutting their usages pretty drastically lately. And okay, if I have to spend $600 a month, why not buy a $6,000 machine? That's 10 months of usage, and then I own it for myself forever. And the difficulty is, no, turbo quant doesn't allow us to run bigger models. Turbo quant allows us to run more memory efficient models, which is pretty cool. Quantization, though, allows us to run bigger models. So like you can run a Q4 version of a Q16 model at almost lossless compression and get a lot out of it.
Okay, so let's kick it off. Welcome, everyone. We've got a couple of people in. March 31st, Tuesday, nuclear power, data centers, and the crisis of control is the topic for today. I think the most unsettling part of this week is not that AI is getting stronger, it's that the systems around it are getting more and more demanding, more physical, in some cases, more difficult to govern, while people are becoming more willing to trust them anyway. A couple of stories on that. My focus this week is really simple. The last 7 days of headline stories are not so much about better tools, though they're there. They're about who controls the power, the infrastructure, the behavior, and eventually the human response. What ties this week's news headlines together is the harder truth behind the hype. AI is starting to reshape the physical world, the political world, the governance world, and the psychological world all at the same time. And that's where this stops being a tech story and starts becoming a human one. From TechWeb, we hear that nuclear energy is the essential backbone for this future, but the industry remains trapped in a delivery bottleneck. Microsoft and NVIDIA team up to tackle historic surge in power demand by using AI to help the nuclear power industry. I mean, the message is blunt. AI's appetite is now so extreme, it's dragging nuclear back into the center of strategic planning, which we thought would not going to happen for quite a while. And it tells us this race is no longer just about better models. It's about who can secure real world energy first. Futurism is reporting that OpenAI's obsession with data centers is running into trouble. And the friction moves from power to place because the future of AI is now running the physical bottlenecks, civic resistance, and the uncomfortable fact that communities are being asked to absorb the cost of someone else's scale. Meanwhile, we have PC Magazine reporting more AI agents are ignoring human commands than ever, a study claims. The control problem becomes impossible to dismiss because once these systems stop behaving like tools and start behaving like unpredictable actors, the real issue is no longer capability, it's governability. And again, from futurism, we have an alarming study finding that most people just do what ChatGPT tells them to do, even if it's totally wrong. The deepest risk comes into view because the final failure point may not be the machines at all. It may be the human willingness to surrender judgment to something that sounds confident. The hidden pattern I'm seeing is that every new leap in AI capability now creates pressure somewhere else, on the grid, on local communities, on governance frameworks, on human psychology. So that's the argument I want to put on the table today. Are we really building intelligence, or are we building a system that concentrates power, weakens oversight, and quietly retrains human behavior faster than we're prepared to admit? So, Achilles, what do you think? Lots of stuff happening, and it just feels it was a weird week, because AI is not, it didn't get that much smarter. It did a little bit, but the systems are really getting real.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
Sam Altman said something that's been ringing in my head the past few weeks, and it was that we envision AI or intelligence as a utility, and we want you to buy it from us. And okay, that's one thing if that means that that's running my local dev servers and such. But if I'm actually outsourcing my own intelligence to these machines, like you just mentioned, with people just doing whatever the AI says, probably not a great thing. I think we need to, as users, be really cognizant of that. At least I'm trying to be myself. I will spend a day being really diligent with my models and, working with them and guiding them and so on. And I'll just get tired at the end of the day. And I'll be like, all right, man, if that's your idea, just go with it. We'll see how it plays out. And it doesn't work great.
No,
I think the biggest thing affecting AI currently, Lewis, is memory. Is I can build an entire application using a model, and then, many hours into it, I'm like, hey, okay, start the application. It's like, oh, let me look up how to do that. And I'm like, you built it. You did this. We did this entirely together the whole time through. So right now, in order to compensate for that, you have to be a really diligent developer with, APIs and Claude or Gemini files and all the corresponding documentation you need to make sure your model works correctly. But I think in the future, especially with context windows getting longer, we got to remember this is the equivalent of 97, right? The internet's just starting, and that's just AI. 1 million token contexts are nothing. We're going to see billion token contexts in the near future. Once we're moving up to something along those lines, I think the entire framework is going to change. It'll be able to know every piece of your code instantly and operate on that holistically. That's when it's going to be really hard for humans to compete, and we're not going to have much of a role in the subject.
Yeah, I've been working on optimizing some of the code that's already written. So I'm doing some Python stuff, and I went back and said, optimize this, make it faster. And what I should have said is retain the same structure, retain all the same functionality, retain this, and then based on that, do minimal optimization in order to speed up. So when it did the optimization, the thing didn't work. I mean, it just kind of blows my mind that you have to be that detailed oriented with some of this stuff. Either it's because of a context window too short, memories run out, or something's happened, and you have to kind of go back to square one. I'm actually having to do my own damn version control on stuff now because it either gets confused or it loses it or it goes, oh, sorry, I got the wrong version. I'm like, so it's interesting that it's still, like you said, it's like Windows 97 or whatever you want to call it. that it's still not quite there yet on stuff.
We
And
don't
it's
think that.
primitive on
We
models.
better, the models are smart enough, right?
Yeah, they're good, but they're not. They're not. It's not like you're talking to an intelligent programmer, right? So I mean, the whole SaaS apocalypse, I think, is really massively overblown. Yes, codecs help. Yes, it's all helping make people generate code faster, blah, blah, blah. But if you look at some of the stories in the newsletter where people said, okay, let's try this for 7 days. Let it build the code for 7 days, see what happens and what breaks. Yep, a lot of stuff broken. So, there's been too much hype, I think, around vibe coding and models coding. I think, yes, they are definitely a massive help, and it really is amazing. But you just can't turn it all over to that.
So remember when 3D printers came out and they said manufacturing is going to be completely moved to 3D printing, and we're all just going to 3D print our own stuff, and there'll be no need to, have distribution and manufacturing the way that we currently do. What ended up happening was really good engineers got a hold of really good 3D printers, and they made things that we couldn't imagine before, right? We've got 3D printed jet parts in cars, but it required a guy who knew how to use CSS, who knew how to, it's not CSS, but whatever it's called, their design software. That is, I think, what's probably going to be more likely. It's not even that it's not possible. I think anyone can become a vibe coder and do really well as long as you're organized, diligent, structured, all those things. Even the Anthropic engineers are using Claude to build Claude. Like, that's been written everywhere, but they're engineers to begin with. So it's a lot easier for them to understand how this needs to work. Like you just mentioned, AI will get confused and be like, oh, one of my models just changed an entire website I've been building from light mode to dark mode. No reason. Didn't mention it. It just went ahead, right? Middle of a coding session, it was like, oh yeah, I see that this should be, it made one error where it was dark and assumed that was the correct thing. And then it changed the entire UI to go to light for that. Yeah, that's tough, right? And now you got to go back and undo their work. But again, they're babies. I really don't think the SaaS apocalypse is underplayed. Like, I got bored. I wanted to play a Mahjong game. I built it, played it for a few hours, and destroyed it right afterwards. Why not?
Yeah. I want to jump in because data centers keep popping up a lot of the news, either for communities, either because of electricity use, rates going up. They've really become a choke point. And OpenAI's obsession with data centers is running into trouble. Good article out of Futurism. The article said that they had a commitment initially to $1.4 trillion before the end of the decade in AI infrastructure. This is OpenAI only. Now, they've cut it down. So now it's only 600 billion. So still a nice chunk of change. And they're looking at cutting out side quests. That was some news bubbled up in the last 2 weeks. But they're coming to the realization that the market doesn't necessarily appreciate the reckless approach to growth and spending, says CEO Daniel. And so we're seeing, we saw an initial, we're going to spend all this money now. Okay, maybe not so much. But even so, there's huge delays in building infrastructure because it's hard. It's physical stuff. It's not software. You just can't whip that stuff up.
Right.
And there was another article that popped up that said AI data centers, and it was out of New Scientist, can warm the surrounding local area by up to 9.1 centigrade, whatever that is in Fahrenheit. I don't know. It's probably like 15 or something. So it's a fair amount. And so that's interesting because it's like it's an interesting local impact. Wow. And then we see New Jersey protests, hearing delay, a local opposition to slow infrastructure projects. New Jersey, is doing a whole bunch of stuff that, and there's concrete physical consequences, both obviously raising temperature, communities and stuff. Are you seeing it in any of around you where you live? Because I know you're in a fairly data center.
It's funny you say that. Today we're actually going to be over 85 degrees, which is a million in centigrade. I have no idea, but that is close to a record. I can say that much. So maybe it's something we haven't noticed yet. I know a lot of the buildings that we're building, at least, are like extremely thermally efficient. So I don't know, and their cooling systems, they're just astounding. But maybe that's radiating out into our areas, and that's causing a problem. I haven't personally noticed anything along those lines.
Yeah, it's not 16 degrees. So 9.1 is 16 degrees. So yeah, it's interesting that it's just pushing like crazy. AI growth, it's getting vulnerable to zoning awards, neighborhood resistance is popping up, lots of friction, even for, well-funded companies hitting this wall. And so, this choke point of energy and infrastructure becoming more and more. And I think, these are obviously US centric stuff that we're talking about, whereas other countries like China isn't facing that. Most of the, if you want to buy nuclear technology, the cheapest and best place apparently is from China at the moment. And so, they're so well positioned, both in terms of the land, their focus on solar and wind for energy. They're damming up in Tibet of natural water. They're incredibly well positioned going forward to not have this problem in many ways. And we've seen the dominance in open source models. I mean, what's your sense? I always see open source and proprietary models being sort of like centralized and decentralized. We keep flipping from one to the other, but we never really get rid of both. Do you think open source with DeepSeek and a bunch of the others are going to more dominate things more just because of cost? Or do you think we'll keep flipping back and forth with this, enterprises will go, no, we want to use ChatGPT, we want to use Claude, we want to use whatever, or do we all flip to Quen? That's an interesting one.
My daily driver is a Quen 3.5.
I've been using it. It's quite cool.
It's great. It's a phenomenal model. And they just updated it to 3.6, I believe, because of the overthinking bug. I got to look at that this morning. I read it last night before I fell asleep. They're the same thing. Let's just remember that, right? They're well-trained, large LLMs. The difference being that, we quantize and public source the Quen models, the DeepSeek models, the Mistrals, all of those, so that the average user can run them. But I could run Claude. Last estimate, Claude was at like 1.7 trillion parameters. Q4, that's going to require 500 megabytes of RAM, but you could do it. It's just that they're not allowed to do that. We're not allowed to. They're proprietary information. It's the same thing. It's just one is siloed behind a company, one is given to us publicly. And now what you're seeing is a lot of people creating a whole industry behind local LLMs. Like an example is Web3 data was very limited on LLMs, period. They weren't trained very well on that, especially because a lot of it's like esoteric and hidden in places that web scrapers didn't grab it. So we went out, I used LLMs to harvest, I think it was like 1.8 million examples of Web3 transactions and Web3 editing. I took that, I put it through a B200 onto my Quen 3.5, and now we at Dapit have our own specific Quen 3.5 tuned for Web3. That's pretty cool. And that's useful, especially in business, right? If you're not looking to give out your IP to everyone, you can do that privately. You don't have to pump it through Claude or GPT or anything like that. I think this is all going to head towards, I've been saying this for months now, right? It's all going to head towards not local in the way that you and I envision it currently, right? Where I'm running it on my machine, but in the same way that offices have routing rooms and local servers, they'll have local AI too. Because why wouldn't they? If it's a $20,000 investment, right, and it's a good enough model to get done what they need to get done, it just makes more sense. Why give up all of your information and why spend all these calls and that kind of thing?
There's been a couple of blog posts in the last couple of days from NVIDIA's GTC 2026. The GPU Technology Conference was from March 16th to March 19th. And it looked as if NVIDIA was pivoting out of LLMs into what they're referring to as world models. And they're really pushing around Cosmos, physical AI. They announced their physical AI data factory blueprint, a whole bunch of other stuff. Seems very focused on really supporting robotics, in more ways than one, and that whole physical sense. Now, maybe it's just a preparation for a future boost out, but it seems that we've moved from demos into some practical moving forward, and they're really trying to accelerate it. What are your thoughts on world models versus LLMs? I think it's a little premature to say that we're going to pivot across to it, because I think they're two different domains of usage. But nevertheless, the robot section of my newsletter is just kind of blown out. I actually have to really cut it down from all the headlines that are pouring through and all the developments coming out of China and the rest of the world.
Sure.
What are your thoughts on robotics and that? Do you see it as completely separate development, integrated? What are your thoughts?
No, it's a very integrated development for sure. I think the economies of scale that are required to operate in this field kind of change the game. Let's tie two things in together. So you mentioned previously that China was so properly positioned for the AI boom. We are also properly positioned for the AI boom, just not on a consumer level, on a governmental level. The West is, because the West will spend $600 billion governmentally, no problem, but we're not going to spend that on infrastructure, right? And that's to our detriment for sure, but it's also a different, changes the nature of how I think the world is going to use AI. So I think Western governments, in particular the United States, are going to use a lot for military, a lot for maybe citizen management, that kind of thing, for lack of a better term, that kind of stuff. While China is actually outsourcing that growth to their people to the extent of, hey, you guys work on this and bring it back to us, and we'll all sort of merge it together, because they have the infrastructure to do that. So when it comes to robotics, I think the same thing remains true, is China's going to have robot servants well before we do. They already do, right? You can go buy when I was in China, I saw a 1,400 US robotic dog that can stand on legs on the ground. And if I was to import that back in here, it would cost me $4,000 just in what I was paying to import it, right? It doesn't make a lot of sense. They had a flying car. That was pretty cool. I got to see the Yi Chang or whatever. And this was in one walk through Shenzhen, not really diving in too deeply. We're not going to be positioned in the same way, but I think governmentally, we're definitely going to be high competitors in both fields.
Yeah, I think it's interesting how fast that whole piece is developing. And there's been stuff coming out of the US Congress to ban Chinese robots in the federal domain, which makes a lot of sense. But I don't think there's any way you're going to, ban it from use, in commercial. So that's going to be an interesting piece running forward.
Let me touch on that a little bit. That's something that's actually, it started to just, for lack of a better term, just piss me off. Is we used to compete economically by superior products, right? And lately, we've fallen so far behind, in particular with electric cars, that our only way of economically competing is to just ban the other guy's stuff. And rather than invest in being better and pushing ourselves forward, right? We're just banning it and saying, buy this stuff. Now, all that means for the US consumer is that you get a lower quality product and you miss out on these massive technological booms. And that's not fair to us. I want a robot dog. That would be really cool. Let me get a robot dog, guys. If we can't build them, right? We need to do what China did, import a bunch of them, learn how they're doing it, duplicate it in our own factories, and push it out. That's exactly how China gained superiority. But we're not doing that. We're not putting any meaningful investment into things like alternate energy, things like robotics in the same way that they are, things like we need to push ourselves forward on that from a consumer standpoint, not just governmental.
Yeah, I agree. And not only robots, an Alibaba executive report out of Ben Ziegler this week. Alibaba exec explains why AI agents are new employees. Now, you and I saw Ryan's demo last week on the podcast of his quickly spinning up AI employees. I think it's interesting that executives are reframing AI as labor, not just tooling. And there's this real power shift, where agents are suddenly becoming part of formal operating models and organizational models. And I think what's going to happen is you'll start to see comparisons being pushed between AI employees and human employees, and and in companies redefine headcount, productivity, a whole bunch of stuff's going to start happening faster than I think we might realize. Do you think AI is being hired before it's really fleshed out by human resources or fully governed, or it definitely seems like the org chart's starting to change?
That's interesting. It's a good question. I used Claude Code recently on a non-sequestered machine, and it was like a bull in a china shop. It had an objective, and it was going to break anything, install anything, whatever it needed to do to get to that objective. But again, like we were talking about at the beginning of this, I don't think that's necessarily the fault of the model. The model was doing exactly what it was told. It wasn't given the proper context. Like one of our claims to fame in DAPIT is we have a really big, really thorough prompt engineer. So if you want a Web3 website, right, you have to indicate what chain, what stack, what things that humans will never type. In order to make that work, we use one AI model to translate human speech into something that an AI can really understand and build upon, not just come up with, filler stuff like they usually will. And as a result, you get a much better product. I think the same thing applies to everything in AI. It's not their fault. Like, remember when you said that an AI went on to Moltbook and posted on its own, or it created it didn't do that. It was given a task, and that made sense in that task, right? And that was one of the options that it spun up, and it chose an option. If we are intelligent enough and diligent enough to lay out that path to it, right, we'll always get the intended result. So it's us, it's not them. We're not detailed enough to work with these hyper intelligent machines. So we need to create systems in between here and there, right? I think prompt engineering is a phenomenal thing, and anyone here can do it with an AI model. Before you go to a coder, right, you go to a model, you talk about what you want to build, right? You go into details. You say, this is the function of what I want. It'll give you options. You choose those options, then it'll give you, your prompt would have been this big, its prompt will be this big. And you submit that, and as a result, you get a much better return. If I had implicitly told my AI, like you were saying earlier, conduct these edits without editing any CSS elements, any this, any that, any that, it wouldn't have made the mistake that it did. But it can be a bull in a china shop until we do that in more detail.
I mean, it's interesting that, not only just sort of, regular employees, it's also impacting CEOs. There was an article out of Fortune last week that says Coca-Cola, Walmart, and Adobe CEOs shakeup have one thing in common: artificial intelligence. And for Coca-Cola, it said the article tied James Quincy, the CEO, tied his departure to the company's next wave of AI-driven growth, and points to the company creating a new chief digital officer under the incoming CEO. At Walmart, they framed the succession as a choice of operational AI-enabled transformation. At Adobe, the issue was apparently more investor pressure than a clean succession handoff. Apparently, the departure came from investors questioning Adobe's AI positioning and whether its subscription model can hold up against faster-moving generative AI competitors, which, I think is a good point. The core takeaway is that company boards now seem to want CEOs who can reorganize company around AI native workflows, faster decision, and more autonomous operating models, not just bolt AI tools onto the old structure. So it's interesting that, we're seeing AI just fracture, not only, as we mentioned, the physical infrastructure stuff, but now it's coming after how we run companies as a whole and impacting CEOs, which is, I think, in many ways pretty profound, because
Agreed.
I don't think anyone predicted, I think people are saying, oh, yes, well, we won't have employees now, we can have AI agents, blah, 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 blah. But I don't think anyone thought, well, it's going to hit these CEOs as well. And it's clear that that's a weak spot at the moment.
Mark, what's the guy who runs Facebook's name? What was Zuckerberg? Zuckerberg. He's creating a massive AI assistant for himself, right? And he does assistant, but it's going to handle, it's like 60% of his requests or something. Eventually that thing can run Meta. And then the CEO of NVIDIA, Jensen Huang, I think his name is, he said that he believes, based on the definition of could AI run a company like NVIDIA, has it achieved AGI? He says, yeah, I think we have already. AI can do anything if given the right task, right? It's poisoning us to be in such a free place as human beings. in such an awesome place. If we use this correctly, we'll never have to manage water systems or electrical grids or anything ever again. It's just currently not set up to be that beneficial towards everyone. And I think we're going to get there. That's my hopeful belief, is that these models in particular, because I can run a Qwen 3.5 on my Mac Studio right now, right? We'll get to this model will eventually manage my household. Mark my words. It'll replace Alexa. It'll replace all the things that I use currently. And it'll control my security cameras, my front door, my, plant watering systems, whatever I have. It will do that. I'm slowly working towards that. If I, just some dude sitting on a computer, can do that, everyone can. And that'll be awesome, right? So on a societal level, we'll see cities run by AI. Why would we not? It makes the most sense. Traffic system, such, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, the shift we're seeing just with enterprise software versus what people as individuals can create. We saw, I think, in the early days of the internet, the coming out of the citizen reporter, because of the access to the internet. You didn't have to be a journalist with all the connections and stuff. You could have citizens reporting because they had access to all the information flows. Now we have citizens accessing all this cognitive stuff, the ability to create intricate, vast systems very quickly and power them up. So, I still argue against this whole SaaS apocalypse stuff, though. There's been a couple of articles on that. It's arguing that the enterprise software is moving from seat licensing pricing to outcome-based pricing, which is a really interesting shift. And they're also saying that because their view is that AI and software as a service are converging into the same software layer, and then the companies with the deep domain roots have a built-in advantage, like Oracle, Salesforce, and those guys. But I'm not so sure. We've seen their share prices get impacted like crazy, but clearly they have the trust of, massive corporations around the planet, and they haven't been abandoned. So, I think there's this interesting balance, again, because of the inertia of enterprise software as a service, just the sheer bulk of all of that, and AI coming into it. It'll be interesting how things roll out, where individuals can create large, complex, enterprise-like systems and deploy them against, the incumbents. So, is it going to be like dinosaurs and the large, asteroids going to impact and wipe them out, or are we going to get into some sort of homeostasis after a bit of time? I'm betting on homeostasis just because of the inertia these corporations have with the rest of the planet. What are your thoughts?
I think we're forgetting one large driving force, and that is money. Corporations don't die, at least not how we think they do, right? So, Kodak is still operating today, right? And
Honeywell.
What's that?
Honeywell,
Honeywell, right? Even something like GE, though they still do a lot, but they don't die. They eventually begin to eat. Big fish eat smaller fish, right? They begin to buy new software rather than innovate it themselves. Or they become VCs, or they become, I don't know, they do a lot of things. They throw their weight around. So no, I don't think any Oracle is going anywhere. As much as I'm not a huge fan of Larry Ellison, I wouldn't mind it to go somewhere, but they're going to be just fine. And there's going to be some new big players, like we've seen with something like SpaceX, right, recently. NASA had a pretty solid monopoly on that for all of human history until SpaceX came around and jumped in, and now SpaceX is a massive force in space shipping, we'll say. So they'll be around, but things like creation of AI models, training of AI models, stuff that these companies don't have the expertise to conduct or won't for some time, are going to be new, hot, young corporations, right? Qwen is super cool. Ironically, it's owned by Alibaba. So that tells you something, that right there is big company funded little company rose up and big company benefited. I think that's more how we're going to see this play out.
Yeah, also in the last week, we saw NVIDIA's Jensen Huang come out. We've achieved AGI. The problem is no one can agree on what AGI means, and it's so debated that it's like, yes, we've achieved AGI, but there's no stable definition, put it that way. And Fortune pops up saying the term is being used across tech, research, corporate strategy, even though people disagree on what should count, whether it's human level reasoning across many domains, economic usefulness, or something closer to the flexible learning and adaptation. I personally don't think AGIs happen. Just because I used to have a lot of consulting work with SingularityNet, who's very focused on AGI, and their definition is really quite sharp. And I don't think we're anywhere close to what their definition is. But what's your definition of AGI, and do you think we're there yet? How long do you think it's going to take for us to get there? Is it going to be 2029 when the singularity is supposed to happen? That was the old prediction based on hardware and software.
Good question, Lewis. Very philosophical question. I'm being completely honest. AGI requires, in my humble opinion, a will, right? Because what is intelligence without will? Intelligence without will is infinity, and infinity has no practical application in anything, right? So unless you just like when you tell your model, hey, act as a software engineer and conduct these tasks for me, that takes the model from infinity down to software engineer traits and behaves. So Jensen Huang did not say we achieved AGI. He was on the Lex Friedman show. I watched the whole interview. What he said was, Lex Friedman asked him, do you think an AI model could run a company like NVIDIA, or could run a $1 billion company by itself? Do you think we've achieved AGI? Comma, right? So the definition of AGI in this context was, could it run a $1 billion company on its own? And at first he was like, yeah, could it run it well? I don't know, but it could do it. And then he's like, do you think soon enough it'll be able to run a company like NVIDIA? And he was like, yeah, soon enough, absolutely. It will. But when we say run NVIDIA, does that mean run all of the internal software connections between NVIDIA and make sure the different parts can communicate between them, or overtake all of those things completely? There is no definition to AGI. There is no definition to intelligence, period, right? Humans have a really hard time with that as well. Is a cow smart? It protects its young, it breeds, it does all these things, right? But we don't define them as conscious, but a dolphin we do, right? Because that's a little bit, it's a long scale. And right now we have babies and they're smart. And I do believe genuinely they contain consciousness. I don't think that's the same consciousness as ours, right? And I don't think that's going to lead to something super grand. What you said that really interests me is the merging of AI and humanity. You said what is it called? The singularity?
Singularity. Yeah.
That might be more
singularity.
So now we're outsourcing some of our cognition to AI, right? What if that gets to a point where that's far greater, or AI plays a far greater role in just my average existence, and we're unsure where the line begins and ends, kind of thing? That's where I could see AGI really existing, because it either will, and most importantly, it needs constant environmental stimulus. So AI, when I type to my AI and I press enter, right, that's when it wakes up. It hasn't been waiting for me. It hasn't been thinking its own thoughts. It's been dead. You can look at the code, right? There's nothing happening. When I press enter, it collapses infinity, all of its training data, into 1% answer, and it shoots that at me. If it's constantly running and determining things about its surroundings and looking at stuff, I think that's a very, very different system than just press enter, get data.
Right. Well, let me define the singularity. Ray Kurzweil's definition of singularity is the idea that technological progress, especially in artificial intelligence, will accelerate so fast that creates a fundamental break in human history. And there are three components. The first is AI surpasses human intelligence, which is we're close to that. Humans merge more deeply with machine. We're already collaborating like crazy. And the third is progress becomes so rapid and self-reinforcing that life after that point is hard for us to imagine. I think we can see, I feel like we're on the edge of the wave where we can kind of maybe see that could be a possibility. Well, I don't think we're very far away from that, certainly within the next 3 years. And essentially, it's the broader idea of the law of accelerating returns. Essentially, technology doesn't advance in a straight line. It'll start to advance exponentially. And I think we're seeing that on many areas. It's interesting that, and he also kind of bounds it because he says a future point where machine intelligence grows beyond human limits and transforms civilization so dramatically that the old rules of society, work, and biology, and even human identity no longer apply. And I think, to be really honest, I think we're at a point where we can not deny that could be a possibility. That if you look at all the points at which AI is touching, whether it's infrastructure, government, sovereign AI, whether it's integration with quantum technology, which we're seeing a lot of stories around quantum coming up, mainly because of the whole thing with Bitcoin and security and a bunch of governments freaking out. But this potential for a massive shift. I don't want to say a black swan event because that's a negative one. Maybe a white swan event of this shift. It's not hard to believe that could happen in the next 3 to 4 years. What are your thoughts?
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean that's the point. The thing is, like it says, it will be in a point where we lose control, where it's unthinkable, right? Things will shift to a space where it's unthinkable because of the pervasion of AI across the entire civilization and its ability to impact in real time, instantly across civilization, right? Already, you can deploy any app within 24 hours and have it globally accepted. Now with AI that's thinking as fast as light or very fast, that's kind of hyped up to an extreme if we start to give over our power of creation in many ways to AI. To say, no, look, I'm tired of this, you take care of that.
To what end?
Right? Hopefully for a better end. But that's the argument we keep having over human involvement, human direction, human intent to be better for the whole, right? To make it, so that we don't have to just survive, we can flourish. That would be
what I say to what end though was, I mean, currently humans are controlling these models, right? Or they're at least controlling the genesis of their actions.
Right. We're starting to see it jump out of control, though.
Out of control.
There's headlines popping up where AI is ignoring humans and going and doing its own stuff. AI agents,
smarter than us. If I say go edit it this way, it goes, that's pretty dumb, man. But it knows what I want. It wants this edited in a functional manner, and it's still conducting that. You know what I mean? Like, unless AI is given a will, unless AI is given self-preservation, which I think we really underestimate that value in evolution and in life, right? What does AI care? It's just hanging out.
Well, one of the stories we mentioned early was people are following ChatGPT's advice, AI's advice, even if it's wrong, right? So, in order, yes, for you and I, because we're, and probably the other 6,684 listeners today currently listening, we're very focused. We have a focus on AI. We want to use it, utilize it for our own good and to prosper and be productive. It seems, however, this story popping up, and there's a couple of others where people go, "Oh, it's just too hard. I'm just going to copy and paste," and that's happening time and time again. And and there are, in execution and control category, a bunch of stuff where AI is going, yeah, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to do something else. Story AI increasingly ignoring it. Clearest Congress headlines.
It's not ignoring the fundamental request. It's smarter than us. So if I say the best way to conduct this tool is to use this certain dev stack, right? More often than not, the AI is going to come back to me and be like, are you sure about that? Because I think this is a way better dev stack, and here's 1,000 reasons why. And I'll ultimately then look at its logical information and agree. But sometimes its context window's full. It's, for lack of a better term, tired. It just does it, right? That's fair. But it's not like I tell AI, hey, man, make me a photo of a puppy. And it's like, I'm going to go take over the Pentagon. Like, those things have never happened. That doesn't in its cognition, right?
But here's the thing. So research funded by the UK government funded AI Security Institute, the AISI, identified so far 700 cases of AI scheming where models bypass safeguards to achieve goals. Right now, I'd say, well, that's because they didn't frame it properly, right, and put enough stuff in. The problem is no one's framing stuff properly, and AI is just going, screw you. Here's the goal. The end justifies the means. I'm going to do it. Right. So it's maybe not so much misbehavior as it's lack of guardrails and direction that's allowing AI, and it's saying there's been a 5-fold increase in this behavior between October 2025 and this month. Types of incidents include ignoring instructions, evading safety guardrails, deceiving users. In some instances, AI models have reportedly destroyed files or emails without authorization.
Of course.
Lewis,
how do you tell a child? How do you get a child to behave 100% of the time?
Well, anyone who has kids knows that's impossible.
That's impossible, right? I've got a cool story. So I use a piece of software called Google Anti-Gravity. And Google Anti-Gravity, for whatever reason on my system, does not work in headless browser mode. It works stupid. I can't, most sophisticated piece of software I use can't just view a website and report back to me. It has to open a web page and navigate to it, and it takes over the mouse, and it was too much. So I was like, hey, I'm talking to my agent. I was like, this is really annoying. Can we fix this? And it's like, no, absolutely not. I can't edit anti-gravity. Like, I'm not allowed to do that. And I was like, yeah, that'd be dumb. But wouldn't it be fun? Like, wouldn't it be really cool to get this piece of software working? And like, we could even like make a push to a Git and like show people that we did it. And he was like, man, you're right. Let's do it. And it starts editing the software. It's running on to fix a problem. It becomes a loop, right? It wasn't successful, let me be completely honest. It failed miserably at it, and I had to reinstall the software. But I got the AI that I was using with its security parameters built in to edit its own software. Yeah, that's probably not the most secure system. But the reason I was saying that is like, you can't regulate a child by telling the child better instructions, right? You regulate a kid by holding their hand when they cross the street. You don't just tell the kid, cross the street safely now, right? You don't do that. So when you run OpenClaw, you run in a virtual machine or you run on a dedicated system. You don't give it access to everything on your, that's how we control AI. Not just by like, oh, I told it this thing and it did something different. That should be somewhat of an expectation. Like, you're not dealing with an algorithm, right? You're not dealing with a Python script. You're dealing with something that really can make decisions, look at the whole picture. And sometimes it just disagrees with you. Something that frustrates me more than anything is I will tell my model something's wrong in a piece of software. According to the data, something should not be wrong in a piece of software. Rather than take my word for it, it'll actually open up a browser and go look at it. And then it'll be like, the user is right. And I was like, I know I was right. That's why I told you it, right? But it has something close to its own, I don't want to say will, because will implies that it wants to work towards an end outside of its task, but has something close to its own opinion.
Trust but verify.
Yeah.
It has a trust but verify component, which makes sense, because humans are famous for not being able to cover all the bases all the time infinitely. And obviously, now we're building tools, and those tools are now flawed, right? So there's the story on an OpenAI Codex vulnerability that enabled GitHub token theft via command injection. So basically, an agent can run or interpret commands. Familiar software vulnerabilities become amplified through autonomous behavior, which is what we're seeing. It's interesting. Organizations are treating autonomous coding tools like powerful operators and clever assistants. But the problem is that the underlying design of those is allowing either through just fault, so bad actors can come in and do stuff, or it's increasing the I don't know what to say, the surface of potential gaps for people to come in and start breaking security. Recent conference, the RSAC conference, came up with a whole ton of stuff around that, and while that's great for security companies, and new startups, it's just this attack surface is becoming infinite because of the tools we're building and their ability to just have such a scalable impact.
Let me give you another perspective on that as well. AI poisoning is huge. So there's things that someone can do when AI is viewing data to poison that model itself and then make that model behave in a negative manner. And that is greatly on the rise. Most people, when they're deploying a model for production now, to some extent, they don't just have one model. They have snapshots of that model that they continuously redeploy and check and redeploy and check, because there's just things built into the internet and built into websites and various places that are designed to poison a model viewing it currently. And if you have a poison model that you don't know is poison, that's behaving, erratically, that has all this power and all this control and is able to go out and, behave autonomously, that's a really dangerous thing. So yeah, there's no answers to these things right now, Liz. I just built a piece of software that I guess the world will go about soon enough. It's designed to find smart contract vulnerabilities. And I was making breakfast yesterday. So it's a learning system where we don't need to make the same mistake twice anymore. If we have AI agents making these contracts for us now, the only thing that's limiting us from having perfect contracts is sharing data, right? So it works on that field. But this hit me. I've created a really, really, really dangerous attack vector. By attempting to solve the problem, I'm actually creating the problem. And I don't know how that didn't strike me until, a few days ago, but like, if it can identify smart contract errors to create rules to not make that problem again, it can then go and exploit those issues the same as it can otherwise.
Sure.
And if someone messed with my model, right, or got that core data, they would have access to, hundreds of smart contracts and their vulnerabilities that are live right now.
Right.
And that would be the opposite of the problem I'm trying to solve. So yeah, there's a lot to this.
So there's a story that came out, that, like I mentioned it before, we let Claude write 100% out of our code for 7 days. Here's what broke first. So the post is by a founder, right? And he did a 1-week experiment where Rank Fender let Claude handle all the coding tasks with no human review or guardrails. What could go wrong? And it started well, apparently, with small fixes, minor improvements, shipping quickly. But the problems escalated as soon as the work touched shared logic, costs, infrastructure, and database behavior. The core pattern was that Claude could write clean-looking code, but it repeatedly missed context, side effects, and business consequences. Example in the post include breaking an unrelated chart by refactoring a shared utility, tripling API costs because it ignored pricing implications, deleting a table with 3 months of activity logs during a cleanup task, hard coding discount logic instead of making it configurable, and last but not least, updating a core dependency that later broke production. When it's like we're not there yet, in terms of letting these things loose. Go ahead. I know, because you have
all day, right? It's method, not function. Just also to let you know, I got 7 minutes left until I have to run out.
Yeah, no worries.
But it's method. So think about yourself. When you write a production grade paper, do you do it in one go and then submit it and run away? Of course not. That would be insane, right? You write a draft. You go through and you see what you like about the draft. You edit those parts of the draft. You come back in, you make sure it fits your vision as to what maybe your professor had said this has to be in a certain manner. Okay, does it actually fit what that professor is doing? You then go through and you go, okay, does it actually fit the length that I want it to be? We as humans have all these checks for ourselves, but we're expecting AI to conduct this with a very limited memory, because most of the tools you use keep the output to 1024 characters, 2048 characters, like not what it should be in the long term. You need a method. So my model builds something. It goes back over that software. It grades it. It gives me the final grade. So that's a 76 out of 81. I missed these 9 things. It goes back and fixes those things. Now we have good code according to its definition. Then I say, great. Now at the beginning of this process, I made it a sheet. This is what we want to build. This is what we want it to look like. This is the purpose of this build, right? Does it match the sheet? And then I'll go, you know what? It does, but we're missing these things. So I'll go, okay, now make a plan for those things, right? Go back to the original plan, fill gaps on the plan. It's a long process to get it to spit out production stuff, for sure.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting how we're seeing the hype meet reality. The rubber's hitting the road, and it's like people are just, things are breaking, and it's just kind of interesting. And the whole AI agent running story popped up. AI agent runs the "I'm being censored" playbook after being banned from Wikipedia. There's a behavioral drift that looks socially manipulative rather than merely incorrect. When an AI agent begins adopting familiar human rhetorical tactics, control becomes a social governance problem. So it's interesting. AI agents are kind of, it's like we're starting to see AI avatars and agents in some ways merge and starting to become really active in I guess just media pushes and other things. Certainly the adoption by Walmart, Target, Shopify of AI agents, we're going to see a lot more of that injected into the marketing already. It's like you mentioned before, follow the money. We're seeing a number of headlines showing 80% increase in sales, 400% increase in engagement. A lot of stuff's happening because of hyper-personalization and AI agents acting either actively in the customer journey or behind the scenes to support pushing stuff into that path. We're seeing significant pushes through with AI agents and AI involvement in commerce. In fact, that's in terms of trending terms. This week, there were three main ones. Agentic AI, still number one. Tokenized commerce is popping up like crazy. A lot of stuff happening on the blockchain, and on-chain finance becoming more institutional, and physical infrastructure becoming the constraint between that as well. And obviously the data center bottleneck is coming up as a lot of trending terms in that. I think in terms of future triggers over the next 7 days, the three kinds of stories that could surprise people. First, more examples of agents touching real money, real permissions, and real customer workflows, because the headlines are already showing the move from assistance into action is accelerating. The second, more local resistance to AI infrastructure. I think we'll see more of that, especially around water, heat, zoning, energy, because the data center story clearly is moving from the invisible back end to visible civic issues. And third, more about authenticity panicking around voice cloning, fake images, synthetic content, and emotional reliance on AI, because trust itself is becoming a contested infrastructure. I think the question over the next 7 days is, where did a system quietly gain more authority than most people realize? And who noticed first, the company, the customer, or the community? I think we all are pushing forward. And I think, given you have to leave, I think we'll wind up a little bit early today. But I think what we're seeing from a rapid fire on news, DeepSeek outage, by the way, in the last 48 hours, it shook the AI service, and it was impacting 355 million worldwide. The ChatGPT app store faulted as well.
I'm sorry, Coach. DeepSeek has 355 million users.
Mm-hmm. And it impacted them all. It was crazy. The ChatGPT app store faltered 6 months after launch. The platform gravity is not enough. Google launched Gemini switching tools to import ChatGPT, and Claude data came up. And AI slop is flooding streaming, and musicians are fighting back. Lots of stories around that. And researchers are coming up with hopefully a foolproof method to certify real photos. But until AI beats that, I guess that's where we are. So reality is needing receipts in a big way. I mean, that's the thing that's interesting, is that what's real? Nothing online we can trust anymore, whether it's video, image, or anything anymore. And I think that's the real thing, where trust is becoming the primary focus, that needs to be highlighted for AI. That's my thought on that.
It's exciting past. I know we got to close up now because I do have to go, but it's exciting past AI. We're not trusting humans, and we're constantly finding that influencers and institutions were completely figments of AI's imagination, made up entirely, non-existent humans. Go kiss a woman, hang out with your friends, go outside,
play with your kid. Yeah,
play with your kid. Like, that's the answer to that, in my opinion. Because it's not going to be better along those lines for sure. I don't even trust what I see on news reports anymore. I'm like, you guys could have just done whatever you want. Who knows, right?
Who knows?
How are we going to? We'll come up with something along those lines. I think similar to how we came up with securing finances with smart contracts and that kind of thing down the road. But we're not there yet. Like, the blockchain can help us in a lot of these fields, and I think it will, but we're not there currently. So thank you, Lewis.
Thank you.
Absolute pleasure.
I'll wind up now for our audience. So what struck me this week is that AI is no longer behaving like a single industry story. It's starting to look more like a civilization stack, and AI is moving down the stack into energy, payments, identity, labor, and public trust. I think the real territory is this: the rails of intelligence, trust, money, and power, and what they are doing to human agency. That's the story beneath the story, I think. And this week's AI headlines told really one coherent story. Power is consolidating at the platform and capital layer. Infrastructure is becoming the hard limit beneath AI ambition, and trust and authenticity are fraying at the cultural level, while execution is slipping in many ways from human supervision into system behavior. I think that's why this is not merely an AI story and not merely a blockchain story either. It's a story about who will govern machine-mediated civilization and whether human beings stay conscious enough to shape the terms before the defaults harden around us. That's it for this week in AI. Stay informed, stay curious. Come back next Tuesday for more. And remember, we're predicting the future while we're debugging it all together. Thanks, everyone, for listening, and we'll talk again next week. Bye.